Hey everyone, you're about to hear my story of how Jesus saved me from mental illness. And along with the video, I'm going to be starting a Facebook page called Jesus Heals Mental Illness. And on the page, I'm going to be sharing more of my story, but also bringing on others who have had very genuine encounters with Jesus Christ to save them from very real sufferings and mental illness. And so it's also going to give you an opportunity if you're suffering right now, and I know a lot of you are suffering with anxiety or depression or other things, that you can come on and ask questions and get help from people who have had genuine experiences in their faith and in their lives. So thank you so much for listening to this video, that you may know the person Jesus, because it's all about him. It's not about the people who he's saving in a sense, it's about the Savior. So enjoy this video, and I look forward to connecting with you. Hey guys, this is my story of how God saved me from mental illness. And it's a really long story, and there's so many layers to it, but I'm going to tell you what really happened within me. I had a very genuine, real, raw experience, and it's my hope that in sharing my story and being vulnerable with you, that in a world of mental illness where there's a lot of shame involved over the thoughts that people go through, that you will see that Jesus really does heal mental illness. He did so in my life, and it is a miracle, and I want to share it with you. About 6 years ago, I was a very normal religious person, very church-going. I was a missionary in Russia for a year. I loved to talk about God. I went to church all the time. I memorized Bible verses. I would say that when I was in college that I had a religious turning towards thinking about God. I thought at the time it was like a recommitting my life to Christ type of a thing, and I stopped drinking and partying, and I started going to Bible studies and all these things, and that's kind of what my life looked like until I was about 28 years old. And I was very involved in my church, leading worship and all these things. And I was actually engaged to be married to a girl. And we were to be married in about 6 months, and I hurt my back playing football one day. And it was a very simple injury. It wasn't anything extreme. I just kind of tweaked my back, and I was very strong and fit at the time. And so my only goal was, well, I want to get my back better before our wedding day. And that was the only goal, to look good and healthy and strong for my to-be wife and for my just everybody watching for my wedding day. Pretty simple, but unfortunately my back did not get better. And it actually got worse in some senses because of all the stress that I was worrying about it and putting on it. And so there would be days where I started rehab and it just wasn't getting better. It wasn't getting better. I was doing everything I could think of to get it better, and nothing was really working. And so the time was getting closer and closer to the wedding day. And so it's from that point, it was about 5 months till our wedding day, and still wasn't getting better, still wasn't getting better. And then for the first time in my life, I experienced what I would just call anxiety. Up until that point, if you had asked me what anxiety was, I would have said like worrying about a test or just common worry. But right around that point to where my back wasn't getting better, I developed anxiety. And the way I would describe anxiety is losing control, and it affecting you not just emotionally, but also physically and spiritually. And it began to snowball for me, and my back wasn't getting better, and I began to worry more and more about it. I remember the first night I woke up with a small panic attack, and I woke up in the middle of the night and was in a very small panic, and then I went back to sleep. I didn't even really know what it was, but I knew anxiety was starting to come into my life. And so at that point, my back's almost getting better. I'm still anxious about it. And then finally, the day my back gets better, at least from what the doctors told me, like, you're healed, the anxiety had increased by that point and had snowballed enough. And I remember it very vividly. As I'm almost leaving the doctor's appointment, the nurse said to me, she was looking at like charts and records, and she said, "Did you know your blood pressure was high?" And unfortunately, because the anxiety had increased so much, it kind of just went from worrying about my back to then worrying about my blood pressure. And my family has past history with heart issues, and so because of that layer and a few other layers, I just basically started worrying about my health in another arena, my heart and my blood pressure. And so by this point, anxiety was picking up. It was kind of consuming everything that I did. I was now worried about my blood pressure, and so I started, drinking healthy things and walking and always checking my blood pressure, always checking it. But because my anxiety had affected me physically, then it started, my blood pressure remained pretty bad. And so I started to worry about these things. And it was around this point that I realized, I should stop worrying. I need to stop worrying. I need to deal with this. Like, something about God. I need to incorporate something about God into this. And so started trying to read Bible and all these things, but there was nothing I could really read that could help me stop this kind of 24/7 concern. And it was at this point that it really heightened and got really bad. And this whole time I'm kind of resisting taking psych meds, and I had this religious conviction, I don't need psych meds, I was taught that in the church I was going to, and so I was going to stick to it and fight through it. And unfortunately, it just wasn't getting any better. And so I was starting to develop pretty much a 24/7 panic at this point, because again, the wedding day was approaching, and that was the whole thing. Got to get better before the wedding day. Got to get better. And then, and then at that point, it's got to stop the anxiety before the wedding day. And so there was that pressure that was put on me, not by anybody really else. Outside looking in, I had a very normal life, and shouldn't have been worried about anything. I was going to be marrying a great girl, and what's there to worry about? Well, try and tell that to an anxious person. If you've ever experienced anxiety, telling them to stop worrying is not going to work at all. So it came to this point to where I remember I had to drive home to my parents, and I had pretty much a panic all the way from the 5-hour drive. And I finally get to my parents, and they're like, "We're taking you to the doctor, to the psych meds, to the psych doctor." And so I went in, and I remember the appointment, and the guy was like, "Will, you don't have to worry about your blood pressure. It's not even that high, and you don't have to worry about your back anymore." And there was also some other things, kind of intrusive thoughts were starting to happen. I was having irrational fears about sexual desire and stuff like that, all types of things that are shameful to even look back on, but it was starting to develop weird thoughts. But he told me, "Oh, you're fine." And there was almost like a relief went on me for the first time. But he said, "But I do want you to take this psych med." And I was encouraged to take it. And at that point, I didn't know what to do. And so I remember going home to my parents, and I was very normal and fine. And we were even all kind of joking about it at that point. But I took the psych med, and I remember I took the psych med, and I went up to try and rest because I just hadn't been resting very much in that time. And I went and closed my eyes, and for the first time, I started like seeing things. When I closed my eyes, it was kind of weird. I was reacting to this medicine I was taking. And that was kind of a weird experience, but I was like, okay, well, the medicine will get figured out. And the doctor told me, well, just give it some time, type of a thing. So long story short, I came back towards Pittsburgh, where I was living away from my parents. And I got back, and I was like, okay, I'm going to get off of this psych med, but I just need to be more serious about my faith. And I don't have to worry about my back or my blood pressure anymore. But so I was kind of coming off of this psych med, and these anxieties, irrational anxieties, started coming back. And, I was anxious about getting off the medicine. I was anxious about, the medicine was also affecting me physically, and diarrhea and stuff like that. And so it was just switching from one thing to the next about what I was anxious about. And then it kind of became more intense because we're still counting down the days to the wedding day. And at this point, it's like 3 months away or something like that. And it got to the place to where I stopped sleeping. And it was at that point with insomnia that I realized that this is really, 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 really serious. When you're not sleeping and then you're also afraid and you have irrational thoughts, when you're not sleeping, you can't rest in general, and it just becomes a terror. And it came to the point to where I was pretty much afraid I would never sleep again. That was kind of the irrational fear I was having. And so I would lay down and think to myself, just go to sleep, go to sleep, go to sleep, go to sleep. I'm not going to sleep. And then, so you can see that the fear, the anxiety was increasing, and I stopped sleeping. And it was at this point that I started realizing, wow, like I said, this is really serious. And it developed into more and more fears, and it was starting to consume and to affect a lot of parts of my life. I was kind of substitute teaching at the time, and I started being late to substitute teaching. My relationship with my fiance at the time was going downhill. I wasn't even talking to her. I was just basically pacing around town a lot, thinking, because I knew all this Bible knowledge stuff, but none of it was helping me, and I didn't know why. And I was meeting with my pastor 3 times a day, like asking questions. Why can I not get out of this funk? Why am I anxious? How do I stop this anxiety? And it just continued. And I actually remember where I was, where it even got even worse, okay? Because, again, at this point, I'm off the psych med, and I'm back to the conviction of I don't need psych meds type of a thing. And so I was going to beat it without taking the psych meds. And so it got to this place to where I remember I was talking on the phone with somebody, and they said, are you depressed? And I was like, no, I don't feel depressed. I just want out of this. And they said, have you had suicidal thoughts and things like that? And I was like, no, I haven't had suicidal thoughts. And it was about 5 or 10 minutes later, again, just an irrational thought, that it came to the place to where I was afraid for my life. I thought I was going to die. I don't know how to explain it, and it was pretty terrible, but it came to that point to where I was concerned for my own life, and it developed into a 24/7 panic. So this is at the point to where now it's about a couple of weeks before our wedding day, and my fiance at the time made a decision to call off the wedding, again, like 2 weeks or so before the wedding day. And this was the right thing for her to do, because her fiance, me, I was going insane, and nobody knew what to do about it. Everybody just kind of saw Will unraveling in front of their eyes. And so she called off the wedding day. And you would have thought that would have kind of eased everything, but if you've ever dealt with the intrusive thoughts or kind of OCD type things, it just bounces from one fear to the next, and it's all consuming and cyclical, and so that didn't help anything. It didn't make anything worse. I was falling apart. I was going insane. And so it came to the point to where after all this time, this is now in the middle of 2014, that I couldn't sleep. My life was unraveling. I was afraid about everything, irrational thoughts. I started developing like OCD things, washing my hands all the time and all these things. And I realized I came to the point to where I called my parents again. I said, whatever you have to do to me, do to me. I don't know what to say, but I need help. And so it was at that point that they put me into a psych ward. And it was in this psych ward. And with all these things, I plan on making other videos to kind of elaborate or to answer any questions. But the psych ward for me was a new hell. I lived in the hell of resisting psych meds for a time. And then I entered into this new hell of, I was basically force-fed all these medicines at this psych ward. I was there for a chunk of time. And it was there that all these chemicals are now coming into my body, and they're switching all these medicines and all these things. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night when I was there, and my reality being worse than my nightmare. It had gotten to the point to where I lost all hope. I thought I was going to be institutionalized in this ward. I didn't think I was ever going to get out, because I knew I tried everything. I couldn't stop having these thoughts. But with psych meds, what they're doing is they're trying to numb you down, to get you to your emotions stable, in a sense, to where you stop with the chaos. And so I was there about 10 days, and I'm more than willing to share some of the things I experienced there, and just terrible and eye-opening and terrifying. But I was there 10 days, and then they let me out. And so for a brief season, I was living back with my parents, and I was about on 6 or 7 medicines at this time, and just really didn't know what to do. I mean, I was at wit's end, and it was really bad at this point, because now the chemicals are really affecting me. And I remember living with my parents and kind of helping my mom. She was a teacher. I would go and kind of help the librarian at her school, just to give me something to do during the day. But it was absolutely miserable at this point, because now it was, I started to despair, looking back of what happened to me, and that I had ruined everything with the engagement, with relationships with friends, and all these things. And I began to then experience deep, dark despair, intermingled with this anxiety and all these different things because of the chemicals in and out and in and out. And so it came to this point to where actually one of these meds that I took actually was like a miracle. At the time, I viewed it as a miracle of, wow, that just really, that whatever it is, I mean, yeah, I like that one. And it calmed me down enough to where I could come back to Pittsburgh. And so when coming back to Pittsburgh, so at this point I'm on like 5 or 6 meds, and I realized, okay, I'm going to go back to, I got to be more serious about my Christian faith now. I got to be more serious about God, and stay away from, don't worry about the things I used to worry about, and just be more serious. And I got to get off these psych meds. So I was weaning off of these psych meds, and at the time I couldn't tell anybody that I was weaning off of the psych meds, because of I just knew that nobody would like that. I knew my parents wouldn't like it if I told them that they would be concerned, and they would maybe put me back in the psych ward, and I just did not like that place. And so I knew I needed to do it alone, and I was just, I'm going to do it. I'm going to wean off the psych meds, be more serious about God. And but sure enough, as I was weaning off the psych meds, the anxieties and depression started to come back. And it was at this point that I remember going to church, and we met for church all the time, and I would just go, and I would just put my head between my hands and just do like this all service long. And people probably thought, what the heck is going on with Will? And I was really suffering, and I didn't know why everything had happened to me. And now, weaning off these meds, all this was coming back, and I was determined to not let it come back with irrational fears and past anxieties and things. But sure enough, I'm weaning off meds, and it's coming back. And it was at this point that it was like starting to cry out to God, like, God, this is terrible. I don't know what to do, but I need help. And it got down to the point to where I was down to about 2 or 3 medicines, and it entered into a whole new level of anguish. Up until that point, anxiety, OCD, depression. I think I was labeled as like bipolar, schizophrenic in the psych ward, but I was just experiencing mental terror. And I got down to 2 meds, and I remember where I was. I was listening to a Christian YouTube video, and I was listening to the video, just a Christian music video, and I was reading one of the comments, and as I read the comment, it was just a basic Christian truth just written out. And I can share about this if anybody's interested to go in depth more, but I just read the simple truth, and when I read it, it hit me, and it distorted in my mind, and then it latched onto me like a dark, blasphemous truth, or lie rather, but it latched onto me, and I was like, no, that's not true. And then it kind of latched again, and it wouldn't go away, and it was a terrifying thought, and I was like, stop thinking about that. but it kept coming. And it was very disturbing. I remember like thinking, oh my gosh, like I gotta stop thinking this. Like this isn't true. But then it would twist in my mind to, yes, it is true. You know, I started hearing whispers and discerning like, oh yeah, it is true. I remember taking a shower that night and like scrubbing myself down with soap all over my body and saying, at the end of this shower, I'm not going to think this ever again. I'm washing myself clean. Well, sure enough, at the end of the shower, like I'm still burdened and attacked by this thought. And it was at that point that I now, anxiety, depression, OCD things, weaning off the psych meds, so my body was a wreck with the chemicals and things, and now having these dark thoughts, these dark irrational thoughts about God, about people, about myself. It was at that point that I realized if I don't get saved here, I'm going to die. I don't know if I would have killed myself, but because of the panic and the terror, I was sure of the fact that I was going to die if I didn't get help from the misery that I was in. And the problem was that I had been to the psych ward and experienced the psych meds, and I knew those weren't going to help me. I had talked to anybody and everybody that I could in Christian circles, all from the charismatic to the reformed. I talked to everybody. Anybody want to be able to help me? I'll listen to you. But nothing anybody told me helped me. I knew all the Bible verses, I knew Christian lingo, I knew Christian principles, and nothing was engaging in me. And I didn't know why not. And so with all of that having taken place, I began to, at that point, wail and cry out to God. And I remember I was in this small apartment near Pittsburgh and just wailing and wailing and wailing, clenching my teeth and getting just down and just, you know, I'm surprised like I even have teeth because I was just gritting my teeth and just wailing, crying out, God, you have to save me. God, at the top of my lungs, God, save, save, save. Because I didn't know what else to do. And so long story short, right around this time in the seeking too, as I would read different things in the Bible, I also started to question Christianity. Because in my seeking, because of the fears and the irrationalities, I would seek what the Bible had to say, but then I would try and read what the Bible would have to say, and I couldn't understand it. I would try and rationalize it and think through it, but I couldn't wrap my mind around some of the principles because of all the pressure in my mind and what I was going through. I just couldn't understand things, and I was even questioning them. And my whole experience, like I had tried everything Christianity had to offer, and it didn't help me. So, is there another religion that's right that I hadn't heard about? And so, in the midst of all the anguish and the terror, I was also doubting Christianity. And what would happen is I would be in this terror, I would seek God in the Bible, and then I would doubt, and the doubt would throw me back into the anguish, terror, seeking Bible, seeking God, doubt, and it was very cyclical. And the doubting was terrifying in its own right. So pretty much every tenet of the Christian faith I doubted. The existence of God, the existence of hell, the Trinity. Did Jesus really rise from the dead? Is Christianity the truth? The canon, you name it, and I pretty much doubted it. And not just like, I don't think that's true. Maybe I'll learn about some other. I mean, I doubted it in like weeping and terror because I needed saved from what I was going through. And so in that doubting, I was at my end. And yet I was just wailing and crying out to God. And so I remember it forever now. I would go outside and I would just kind of pace around parks in that area. And I was pacing around a park one day, and I had read in Job how it says in the Bible that God swirls the clouds. I don't know the exact passage, but it says God swirls the clouds. And so I was thinking about this, and I was outside pacing around this park, and it was a sunny day with clouds, and I was just walking, pacing, mental terror, darkness, but thinking about God, darkness, terror. And basically what happened is that, all I can explain it is that my eyes were open to creation itself. I remember looking at the rocks and the clouds, and for the first time I was like, oh my gosh, God swirled those clouds. That cloud was swirled by God, and it engaged in my heart for a moment. And it was about 30 seconds of this like, oh my gosh, this is created. And like a euphoric joy came upon me that lasted for about 30 seconds. And then I was immediately thrown back into the darkness and thinking, getting out of these anxieties, getting out of these terrors, all these things, thinking. But I had that experience, and at the time, I didn't even know what happened. But I knew it was something very genuine that happened. A few days later, I'm wailing. I had a sheet over my head in my bed, listening to Christian music, wailing. And all I can say is, again, my eyes were open this time to the incarnation of Jesus, that God came to this earth. God, the Son of God, Jesus, walked on this earth. And it was like, again, like my eyes were open to this reality. Now, if you had asked me 5 or 10 years ago, hey, Will, do you believe that Jesus is the Son of God? Do you believe he's God come in the flesh? Oh, yeah, I can tell you all the Bible verses. I know John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, the Word took on flesh and became one of us. Like, I knew all these Bible verses. I had learned about them. But it was in those moments that my eyes were open to God. Jesus walked on this earth. Had this euphoric 30 seconds and then thrown immediately back into the darkness, because at this point I'm still weaning off of all these psych meds. And I had just convinced myself in my mind, I need to get off the psych meds. I want this to be raw and real. And I just knew that Jesus said things that, like, he who believes in me, out of his heart will flow living streams of water. He said things like this, and I'm like, I want that. And I saw the psych ward in the meds, and that world is terrifying to me. I just want what Jesus is talking about here. And so I decided I just got to wean off the psych meds. So I'm weaning off of all these meds, and it's just putting chaos on my body. But I was having these revelations, what I call them, or illuminations, where these realities were engaging in my heart. A few days later, I remember where I was at. I'm by my couch, again, wailing in a panic attack and misery. And I remember thinking about the miracles that Jesus did, like turning water into wine. And all I can say is it engaged in me that the same Jesus who did those miracles is alive right now. And I was like, whew, oh my gosh, he's alive. And I remember going from like anxiety and panic to like weeping in joy, because he's alive right now. And I just started having these kind of experiences where the realities of the Christian faith were engaging in my heart. And then I was thrown immediately back into panic and darkness. And in the midst of this time, just to kind of catch it full circle, I know this is getting long, but just so you can hear the full thing. And but right around this point, I posted on Facebook about suffering and God. And again, I was doubting a lot. Doubts were lingering all over the place about questions. But I posted on Facebook about suffering and God, and there was a girl who liked two posts right in a row, and her name was Joelle Wallowek. And I was like, Joelle Wallowek, okay, I'm going to message her. And so I ended up messaging her, and we connected immediately. And I expressed to her, like, I'm miserable, I'm going through all these things. But for whatever reason, we really connected about God and just our lives. And we began to develop a relationship when we started dating. And for me, I could not believe it, because this beautiful girl was interested in me. A recent person who was in the psych ward was still like really, really suffering and struggling. Why would she be interested in me? And then I started to realize that this girl's name is Joelle, or Yah-El, which means the Lord is God. So in all this doubting, is Christianity true? Is God true? Is the Christian God, the God of the Bible, the real the real God. And then I meet a girl whose name means the Lord is God. I saw it as God keeping me in the pursuit of Him. That just as a way, a simple, a wonderful girl whose name means the Lord is the Lord of the Bible is God. I saw it as God's grace to me to keep me in the faith. And so long story short, ever since that point, so that was, I guess, in the middle of 2014, my experience has been one of overcoming anxiety, depression, OCD, intrusive thoughts, irrational thoughts, and many other mental illnesses simply by these revelations that God was giving me. As an example, for insomnia, when before the ward, I wasn't sleeping at all. I went through days where I could not sleep, and it was just a terror to me. When I started having these revelations from God, all that really happened was there's a passage in the Bible that says that God gives sleep to the one that He loves. That's it. God gives sleep to the one that He loves. Now, when I was experiencing insomnia and couldn't sleep, I would jam that verse. I had a chunk of cards that I would read, and I had all these Bible verses about peace and sleep, and I'm just trying to read them over and over and over and over and over and over and over. Okay, please go to sleep. And then I wasn't sleeping. But when I realized that God can speak and open my eyes to things, and when He spoke to me, He opened my eyes to the reality of God gives sleep to the one that He loves. When that engaged in my heart, I've slept like a baby ever since 6 years, and I sleep. You can ask my wife. I sleep like a baby. I can sleep at any point, not because of anything that I did, but God spoke this verse to my heart, and that's what I realized happened when I was in that park, and it was my eyes were open to creation, or a few days later that Jesus is alive, or that any Christian principle. I realized that God speaks those things, and when He speaks them, that's when faith occurs. Not learning about God like you learn about math and history that I did for 28 years, but when He speaks that to your heart, that's when His kingdom is being placed within you, and that's when you have faith, when you receive what God speaks to you. And so the past 6 years of my life have been that, in different areas, Him speaking to me, and in that speaking, when I received those things, that I began to experience overcoming or defeating these mental anxieties and illnesses that I was dealing with. So anxiety, the panic attacks. I remember where I was when God gave me a revelation and panic attacks stopped. I remember where I was, where despair was gone, when I realized that all things work together for good. When God spoke to me, all things work together for good to those who love God, who are called according to His purposes. So there's a major difference between just learning about God and like you learn about math, like school, and having an encounter with God and Him speaking those things to you. So that's my story. There are so many more layers. I would love to talk and to answer any questions, or if you're suffering, I'd love to share my story more with you. As far as where I am today, I would say I still deal with very small, different intrusive thoughts is what I call them. And the ones that used to kind of paralyze me for days, hours and days, they would just grab a hold of me and I couldn't get them out. Now I still hear those things, but I know that God speaks as well. That just as I might get a thought that either is of me or is of a demonic spirit, God also speaks. And so I've learned not to listen to my voice or others' voices, but rather to seek the voice of God. And when God speaks, He brings light into the situation. So there's much to say. I could share stories on end, but that's my story of how God really saved me, and how I overcame mental illness, and how Jesus healed me. of mental illness. And it was very real, and it was very raw. It wasn't fake at all. And so, to be clear, and then I haven't taken psych meds for 6 years since I started having those revelations, is when all of that ended. And I have so many thoughts on all these things, and I know the issues, and I wrestled with them, and I know the terrors that people who are suffering go through. And I just want to share my story to be available, and to let you know that there is a healing available that is so raw and so real, because I dealt with it. I knew what it felt like to be panicked 24/7, despair beyond belief, suicidal thoughts, OCD, intrusive thoughts, irrational thoughts. I experienced pretty much the whole gambit of mental illness. And in my experiences and encounters with Jesus, the person, the living being Jesus, I was healed. And so I look forward to connecting with all you guys, and I thank you so much for listening. This isn't about me. This is about Jesus who heals.